Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
Since Donald Trump hasn't ended the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of becoming president like he repeatedly promised.
And I'll stop that war, mark my words, I'll stop that war in 24 hours. But we're in a position.
He's given it a try after 3.5 weeks, but he has absolutely no interest in including the country that was invaded in those negotiations.
Dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster.
Ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, Trump has tried to characterize it as a war Ukraine is responsible for. So now that he wants to negotiate with the Russian leader as far away as he can from Zelensky, he's having to answer for the arrangement that means these aren't negotiations, but orders from Putin to Trump.
Are you freezing out President Zelensky of this process a bit? Isn't there a danger of that?
No, I don't think so, as long as he's there. But, at some point you're going to have elections, too. You're going to have an election.
Just like his embarrassing moment in Helsinki in 2018, Trump can't say anything that resembles any pushback to Putin and his demands. So even though it's obvious that he's working on behalf of Russia, he is willing to look like a sheepish servant, no matter how obvious it is. Just like every other warning his detractors made during the campaign, all the speculation about his intentions with this war are coming true.
Sir, just to be clear, do you see any future in which Ukraine returns to its pre-2014 borders?
Well, I think Pete said today that that's unlikely, right? It certainly would seem to be unlikely. They took a lot of land, and they fought for that land, and they lost a lot of soldiers. But it would just seem to me, and I'm not making an opinion on it, but I've read a lot on it, and a lot of people think that that's unlikely. Some of it will come back. I think some of it will come back. Yeah, some of that land will come back.
After conveying Putin's desires for the land that they invaded to remain in Russian control, this guy had a moment where he realized that he's supposed to act like he wants something different, and then he quickly claimed that they may get some of it back. And I don't even know why. It's not like he didn't campaign on representing Russian interests over and over again.
Any deal, even the worst deal, would have been better than what we have right now. If they made a bad deal, it would have been much better. They would have given up a little bit, and everybody would be living, and every building would be built, and every tower would be aging for another 2,000 years. And it will only get worse with these people. With Kamala she doesn't know what she's doing. And we continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refuses to make a deal, Zelensky. There was no deal that he could have made that wouldn't have been better than the situation you have right now.
Do you believe that Ukraine should cede territory to Russia?
Well, I'm going to let you know that after I have my first meeting. But a lot of that territory, when you look at what's happened to those, I mean, there are cities that there's not a building standing.
It was obvious after the election, but also before he was inaugurated, that whatever he was going to do was based on whatever Putin was going to tell him in their meeting. So now that they've had it, he's relaying Putin's message that he wants to keep the land that, according to Trump, they fought for. No, for real, this process might get even more embarrassing for him than the Helsinki debacle.
You've previously said that you believe Putin sees Trump as what you described as an easy mark. You were there for their first meeting in Helsinki. What are your expectations for this one?
Well, I don't have any expectations anymore. I think we know exactly what's going to happen. President Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin before the negotiations have even begun. The positions that Defense Secretary Hegseth announced in Brussels, which I'm sure I'd be stunned if Trump didn't convey them directly to Putin in their phone call, constitute terms of a settlement that could have been written in the Kremlin. Maybe they were written in the Kremlin and got out in propaganda channels. But It's a complete reversal of the U.S. and NATO position on a number of issues. For example, up until today, the official American position was that Ukraine should be returned to full sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's gone. The question of NATO membership as far back as 2008 had been that ultimately Ukraine would become a NATO member. That doesn't look like that's around anymore either. Putin has scored a whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him. And he's absolutely right.
This is Trump's version of getting along with Putin, I guess. And supporters will still see him as some kind of strongman figure that's gotten Putin to bend to his will somehow. That is, despite the reality. While Ukrainians and their allies were left in disbelief, Russian state TV and radio stations were full of elated propagandists who grinned ear to ear and periodically broke out in uproarious laughter. During Wednesday's broadcast of the state TV program 60 Minutes, host Olga Skabiva described the events as unthinkable and unimaginable. She asked Mikhail Antonov, the network's correspondent in Europe, what does it all mean? Ukraine is left without NATO? Ukraine is left without money? Antonov said that the era of American dominance had ended and surmised that Europe wouldn't be able to compete with the volume of military assistance America used to provide. The co-host marveled at the fact that Trump is doing Moscow's job by destroying Western alliances and sawing Europe into pieces, something that the Kremlin dreamt of doing all along. And to make sure that clueless Americans that support every destabilizing move that this president makes remain in the dark, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs used some of Trump's partisan rhetoric to try to normalize his groveling.
Are you more hopeful now that there can be real and fundamental change and improvement in U.S.-Russian relations?
What struck me was that now the entire world is in a state of shock, viewing the phone conversation and the news about it as something extraordinary. This shows to what extent the staff of the Biden administration, led by their president and their European satellites, have abandoned dialogue and diplomacy as a method of communication with the outside world, opting instead for threats, sanctions, and the arming of the regime in Kiev to wage war against the Russian Federation. Judging by the surprise and shock caused by the phone talks between Trump and Putin, it seems that everything happening in Ukraine and the actions of Zelensky's Nazi regime have been taken for granted. This is how you should communicate with Russia. Perhaps that is why many in the West, including the leaders of the European Union, were shocked when a simple, normal conversation took place between two polite, educated individuals.